You are standing in a chamber cloaked in velvet and shadow, where the air is thick with the cloying scents of incense, medicinal herbs, and decay. The only sound is the wet, rasping breath of the man on the bed, a sound that seems too large for his frail body. This is the Royal of Madrid. The year is 1700, and you are in the presence of King Charles II of Spain, the most powerful monarch in the world. But he does not look like a king. His jaw is so grotesquely elongated, he cannot close his mouth, and a single, viscous string of saliva clings to his chin. His eyes, pale and watery, are pools of perpetual confusion. He is 38 years old, but has the body of an old man, stooped and brittle, and the mind of a frightened child. The whispers in the court call him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. They believe his suffering is the work of curses and demons. But you know the truth is far more terrifying. The monster that haunts this man is not from hell. It is in his very blood, a poison carefully distilled over 2 centuries of pride and ambition. This is not the story of a single, unfortunate king. It is the final, agonizing chapter in the story of a family who became so obsessed with keeping their power pure that they systematically destroyed themselves from within. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the curse, you must first understand the pride that birthed it. The House of Habsburg did not conquer Europe with swords. They inherited it through marriage vows. Their motto, a phrase that echoed in the chancelleries of every great power, was Bella Gerant Ali, to Felix Austria Nubi. Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. For centuries, this strategy was a stroke of unparalleled genius. A well-placed marriage could absorb a kingdom, secure a border, or nullify a rival more effectively than any army. Every royal wedding was a geopolitical masterstroke, weaving a web of alliances and inheritances that eventually placed a Habsburg on nearly every significant throne in Europe. Their dominion became a sprawling patchwork empire, stretching from the silver mines of Peru to the bustling ports of the Netherlands, from the sun-scorched plains of Spain to the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. The architect of this golden age was Charles V, a man who ruled an empire so vast it was said the sun never set upon it. But this immense power came with an equally immense fear, the fear of losing it. The Habsburgs' greatest strength was also their most profound vulnerability. If a Habsburg princess married an outsider, a French king or an English prince, her inheritance, be it Burgundy or Bohemia, would be lost, torn from the family forever. The web would unravel. And so, a new policy, born of paranoia and pride, began to take root. The solution seemed simple, elegant, and divinely ordained. They would marry each other. To keep the power, they had to keep the blood pure. Cousins would marry cousins. Uncles would marry their nieces. This was not seen as a transgression. It was a sacred duty, a political necessity to preserve a God-given right to rule. The gene pool of Europe's most powerful family began to shrink, turning from a vast ocean of possibilities into a stagnant, enclosed pond. With each successive generation, the water grew murkier. The first whispers of the coming storm can be traced back to Joanna of Castile, known to history as Juana la Loca Joanna, the Mad. Her marriage to Philip the Handsome is what brought the Habsburg dynasty to Spain. Her documented mental anguish, a spiraling grief after her husband's death that saw her travel with his coffin for years, was the first ominous tremor. Was it a genetic predisposition to mental illness, or the unbearable strain of a woman's life in a world of political machination? The answer is lost to time. But her story became a dark founding myth for the Spanish Habsburgs, a hint of the instability lurking within their celebrated bloodline. Her son, the great Emperor Charles V, already bore the physical signature of the family, the prominent, jutting lower jaw, and a long chin that would become infamous as the Habsburg jaw. His was a mild case, more of a distinguishing feature than a debilitating deformity, but it was a warning, a genetic marker of the family's insular practices. When Charles V abdicated, weary from a lifetime of war and crippled by gout, he split his colossal empire in two. He gave the Austrian lands and the title of Holy Roman Emperor to his brother Ferdinand, and the vast Spanish Empire to his son, Philip II. This decision created two major branches of the Habsburg family, and in doing so, it doubled down on the need for intermarriage to maintain their alliance. From this point on, the Spanish Habsburgs would almost exclusively look to their Austrian cousins for spouses. The court of Philip II of Spain was the crucible where the curse was truly forged. Imagine the royal palace of Madrid and the stark, imposing monastery palace of El Escorial. These were not places of warmth or light. They were fortresses of crushing piety and rigid ceremony. Every moment of the royal family's life was a public performance, governed by an etiquette so strict that a king could reportedly die of heatstroke, because the official responsible for moving his chair was not present. In this world, weakness was a sin. Deformity was a sign of divine disfavor or demonic influence. The idea that their own marital practices, their sacred duty to preserve their blood, could be the cause of their suffering was not just unthinkable, it was blasphemous. Their blood was chosen by God. Therefore, any affliction must be an external attack, a test of their faith. And so, as galleons heavy with Inca gold filled the Spanish treasury and the Spanish Golden Age produced timeless art and literature, a quiet tragedy was unfolding in the royal nursery. The infant mortality rate within the Habsburg line soared. For every heir that survived to adulthood, many more were born sickly and died in infancy. Miscarriages were tragically common. The children who did survive were often frail, melancholic, and bore the family's physical traits with ever-increasing severity. The proud Habsburg jaw became a grotesque burden. The lips grew thick and drooping, the tongue too large for the mouth. These were not just aesthetic concerns. They made eating, speaking, and even breathing a daily, humiliating struggle. But no one dared to name the cause. They prayed harder, held more solemn processions, and looked to their cousins in Vienna for the next pure-blooded spouse to continue the line. The grand edifice of the Spanish Empire stood gleaming in the sun, while its very foundations were being eaten away by a poison of their own making. The catalyst was not a single moment, but a death, a desperate decision, and a birth. It begins in the court of King Philip IV, a man who presided over the twilight of Spain's Golden Age. He was a patron of the arts, the king who had the master Diego as his court painter, but his own face, captured in dozens of portraits, told the family story. The long jaw, the heavy lower lip, the melancholic eyes, they were all there, a living testament to his lineage. Yet, for a time, it seemed the curse might loosen its grip. Philip had a son, an heir who was the single, brilliant hope of the empire, Balthasar Charles, Prince of Asturias. By all accounts, the young prince was everything his ancestors were not. He was vigorous, intelligent, and charismatic. As paintings show him as a boy full of life, perched confidently on a galloping pony, his eyes bright with a spark of promise that had long since been extinguished in his father's. He was the future. He was the proof that the Habsburg line could and would endure. An alliance was already arranged for him, a perfect dynastic match. He would marry his first cousin, Mariana of Austria, daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor, uniting the two branches of the family and securing the succession for another generation. The plan was flawless. The machine of state was working. Then, in the autumn of 1646, the machine broke. The prince, just 16 years old, fell violently ill. A fever, a rash likely smallpox, tore through his body with astonishing speed. Imagine the helplessness of Philip IV, watching his only son, the luminous hope of his kingdom, consumed by a fire that no royal physician could quench. The air in the palace at Zaragoza would have grown heavy with the smell of scorched bed linens and useless poultices. The prayers of the court would have become frantic, desperate bargains with the silent God. But there was no miracle. Within days, Balthasar Charles was dead. The prince's death was a cataclysm. It plunged Philip into a profound grief from which he would never truly recover, and it threw the Spanish Empire into a succession crisis. The king's first wife had already passed away. He was now a widower in his 40s with no male heir. The future of the world's largest empire rested on his ability to produce another. The solution was immediate, obvious, and grotesque. The bride intended for his dead son, his own niece Mariana of Austria, would now become his bride. The decision was sealed with the cold logic of dynastic survival. Mariana was just a child of 14. Philip was her uncle, 30 years her senior, and now her betrothed. Picture the moment she was told, a young girl in the Austrian court, likely still grieving the cousin she was meant to marry. Now informed that her destiny had been rewritten, she would not be marrying the vibrant young prince, but his grieving middle-aged father. Her womb, which was supposed to carry the next generation, was now tasked with producing a brother for her dead. It was a union born not of hope, but of pure, cold desperation. It was a family tree that had ceased to branch, folding in on itself in a final, horrifying knot. Their marriage bed became the epicenter of the curse. The psychological toll on Mariana must have been immense. She was a teenager, transplanted into the suffocatingly austere Spanish court, married to a melancholy uncle, and saddled with the crushing expectation of saving an empire. Her body became a vessel for the dynasty's last hope. What followed was a heartbreaking parade of failed pregnancies and fleeting lives. Her first child, Margaret Theresa, seemed a blessing. She was the bright-eyed infanta, immortalized in masterpiece, Las Meninas. But she was a girl. The empire needed a son. The pregnancies that followed were a rosary of sorrow. A daughter who lived for a few months, a son who died within weeks, stillbirths and miscarriages that were recorded as mere footnotes in the official court chronicles, but which must have been devastating personal traumas for Mariana. The royal nursery became a place of ghosts, haunted by the specters of children who were never meant to survive. Then came Philip Prospero. His very name, Prosperous Philip, was a desperate prayer. From the moment of his birth, he was a child locked in a battle with his own blood. Haunting portrait of him tells the whole story. A pale, sorrowful little boy, not yet 2 years old, his eyes large and ancient with suffering. He is dressed in fine clothes, but tied to his garments are a collection of amulets, bells, and consecrated charms, pathetic attempts to ward off the evil spirits and sicknesses that clung to him like a second skin. He was so fragile, so racked with epilepsy and other ailments, that he was a prisoner in his own small body. He survived for 4 agonizing years before his flickering candle was finally extinguished. The death of yet another heir almost broke the court. But Mariana was pregnant again. In 1661, she gave birth to her final child, a son. He was named Charles, and from the very beginning, it was clear that this child, the one who managed to cling to life where so many others had failed, was the culmination of all the family's genetic sins. He was the catalyst made flesh. The long-awaited heir had arrived, but his survival was not a miracle. It was the beginning of the end. The boy who would become King Charles II was born broken. His life was not a steady decline, but a constant, breathless struggle from his first moment. He was so fragile, so beset by fevers and seizures, that court astrologers and physicians gave him only weeks to live. He defied them all, clinging to life with a tenacity that his frail body should not have possessed. But survival came at a terrible price. He was the living embodiment of 2 centuries of genetic decay, a human vessel filled with the collected sorrows of his ancestors. His Habsburg jaw was so pronounced that his upper and lower teeth could not meet. This was not a mere cosmetic flaw. It was a daily torment. He could not chew. Every meal was a slow, agonizing process of swallowing soft, mashed foods. A process that often ended in choking fits that sent his attendants into a panic. His tongue, swollen and large, lolled in his mouth, making his speech a garbled series of guttural sounds that only his closest handlers could decipher. For the monarch of a global empire, whose every word should have been law, communication itself was a humiliating ordeal. His childhood was a gilded prison of cotton wool and fear. He was not allowed to run, to play, to experience the simple joys and tumbles of a normal boy. Every draft was a potential pneumonia. Every stumble, a potential shattered bone. He was perpetually surrounded by a hushed cloud of anxious attendants who monitored his every breath, his every bowel movement, as if they were matters of state which, in a way, they were. He didn't walk until he was nearly 4, and even then his legs, rickety and misshapen, could barely support his weight. He was carried everywhere on a litter or in the arms of a servant, a silent, wide-eyed prince, observing a world he was not truly allowed to touch. His education was a tragic farce. He was deemed too mentally fragile for the rigorous tutoring expected of a future king. While his contemporaries, like Louis XIV of France, were mastering languages, military strategy, and political theory, Charles was struggling to form coherent sentences. He remained functionally illiterate for most of his life, able to scrawl his name but little else. The vast complexities of his empire, the endless flow of dispatches from the Americas, the intricate politics of the Italian states, the delicate balance of power in Europe were as incomprehensible to him as ancient texts. He was a king who could not understand his own kingdom. When his father, Philip IV, died, Charles was just 4 years old. The crown of Spain was placed upon the head of a sickly toddler, who could not yet walk properly. The kingdom was thrust into the hands of his mother, the regent Mariana of Austria. The court, already a viper's nest of factionalism, descended into a brutal power struggle. Plots and counterplots swirled around the silent, oblivious boy king. He was the center of all power, yet he possessed none. He would be brought into council meetings, a living relic to legitimize the decisions being made in his name. Imagine the scene: the great ministers of Spain debating the fate of millions, while the king, dressed in miniature finery, sat listlessly on his throne, perhaps distracted by a fly buzzing near the ceiling, a ghost haunting his own government. As he entered adolescence, the full scope of the tragedy became undeniable. The central overriding duty of any monarch was to produce an heir. The entire future of the Spanish Empire, its territories in the Americas, the Netherlands, and Italy, all depended on this one broken body. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on his already stooped shoulders. A wife had to be found. The choice fell upon Marie-Louise d'Or, a niece of the powerful Sun King, Louis XIV. She was, by all accounts, beautiful, vivacious, and intelligent, everything Charles was not. When she was told of her fate, she reportedly fainted. She was leaving the glittering, cultured court of Versailles for the grim, pious halls of Madrid, and a husband who was widely rumored to be deformed and impotent. Their first meeting was a study in pity and horror. Charles, by now a teenager, fell instantly and deeply in love with his beautiful French bride. He adored her with a simple, childlike devotion. For Marie-Louise, it must have been a profoundly shocking experience. She was faced with a husband who stumbled when he walked, drooled when he spoke, and looked at her with the adoring, uncomprehending eyes of a faithful dog. Yet, she treated him with a remarkable kindness. She learned to understand his slurred speech. She held his arm to steady him. She offered him a gentle compassion that he had likely never known. But her kindness could not fix his blood. The years of their marriage were a decade of public humiliation. The court, the kingdom, and all of Europe watched their childless bed. Every month was a new cycle of desperate hope, followed by crushing disappointment. Court physicians prescribed all manner of bizarre and useless remedies. Public prayers and religious processions were held to beg God for a miracle. The blame, inevitably, began to fall upon the queen. Whispers of her supposed infertility, or even infidelity, spread through the court. The pressure on her was unbearable. After 10 years of this gentle, fruitless marriage, Marie-Louise died suddenly. The official cause was likely peritonitis, but the court immediately suspected poison. Charles was destroyed. His grief was absolute and terrifying. He would go to her apartments and speak to her as if she was still there. His one source of warmth in a cold world had been extinguished, but the dynasty demanded a sacrifice. He had to remarry. A new bride was chosen, this time from a German family renowned for its fertility, Maria Anna of Neuburg. If Marie-Louise had been kind, Maria Anna was ambitious and cruel. She was repulsed by her new husband and made little effort to hide it. Her goal was not to comfort the king, but to control the kingdom. She manipulated Charles's fears and insecurities, faking pregnancies to secure political power and influence, only to miscarry months later, plunging the court back into despair. Under her influence, the king's final years descended into a Gothic nightmare. As medicine failed, the court turned to a darker explanation for the king's condition. He was not sick, he was cursed. It was el hechizado, the bewitched. The final, desperate attempts to cure him were not medical, but spiritual. The royal palace became a scene of frantic, terrifying exorcisms. Priests chanted over his convulsing body for hours on end. He was forced to drink holy water and wear sacred relics. In one final ghoulish attempt to shock his body into producing an heir, he was taken down into the royal crypt of El Escorial. There, surrounded by the stench of decay and dust, he was forced to open the coffins of his ancestors and gaze upon their decomposing remains. He touched the blackened bones of his father and the withered corpse of his beloved first wife, Marie-Louise. This was not a cure. It was an act of profound psychological torture inflicted upon a terrified, mentally disabled man by a court that had been driven mad by its own desperation. His suffering was complete, a lonely, confused king, haunted by the dead and tormented by the living, waiting for his own broken body to finally give up. The end came slowly, a final sputtering ember in a long-dead fire. By his late 30s, Charles II was an old man. His body was a roadmap of agony, racked by convulsions, fevers, and a constant, debilitating weakness. His hair and teeth had fallen out, and his pale eyes were often clouded by a fog of confusion and fear. He spent his final months in a state of near-constant delirium, haunted by visions of demons and the ghosts of his family. He died on November 1st, 1700, just a few days short of his 39th birthday. He had outlived all expectations, but his life had been a prolonged death sentence from the moment of his conception. The royal physicians who performed his autopsy were reportedly horrified by what they found. The official report is a litany of His heart was the size of a peppercorn. His lungs were corroded. His intestines were putrefied and gangrenous. His head was filled with water. And most tellingly of all, he was found to have only a single, atrophied testicle, black as coal. It was the final biological confirmation of what the court had long suspected. The Habsburg line in Spain was sterile, decayed, and finished. The last branch of the once mighty tree had withered away. His death triggered the exact catastrophe his family had spent 2 centuries trying to prevent. Charles died without an heir. His will, a document that had been viciously fought over by the factions in his court, named as his successor Philip of Anjou, the grandson of his great rival, King Louis XIV of France. The House of Bourbon, the Habsburgs' mortal enemies, had won the Spanish throne without firing a single shot. The other great powers of Europe, particularly the Austrian Habsburgs and the English, refused to accept this massive consolidation of French power. The result was the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal countenance-spanning conflict that lasted for over a decade and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The Spanish Empire, which the Habsburgs had so desperately tried to keep intact, was carved up and its territories partitioned among the victors. The great project, sealed with so many sacred marriage vows, had ended in total failure and global war. The story of the Spanish Habsburgs is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a profound and terrifying parable. It is a story about the corrosive nature of pride and the dangers of placing the purity of an idea, in this case, the purity of blood and power above the fundamental truths of nature and humanity. In their obsessive quest to preserve their legacy, they engineered their own extinction. Their palaces became laboratories of genetic decay, and their children, the unintended subjects of a horrifyingly ill-advised experiment. They saw themselves as demigods, chosen by heaven, but they were ultimately bound by the same biological laws as the humblest of their subjects. When we look at the hollowed eyes of Charles II in his portraits, we see the tragic endpoint of this legacy. He was not a monster. He was a victim. He was a human being born into a nightmare he did not create, a living sacrifice upon the altar of his family's ambition. His suffering serves as a haunting echo through the halls of history, a timeless warning that any dynasty, any nation, any ideology that becomes so insular, so convinced of its own exceptionalism, that it closes itself off from the world, is doomed to consume itself. The poison that destroyed the Habsburgs was not a witch's curse or a demon's hex. It was the simple, tragic belief that they were the exception to the rule.